The cat reprieves the mouse. She eases from her teeth, just long enough for hope to tease, then mashes it to death. 'Tis life's award to die. Contender if once, then dying half, then rally for consciouser eclipse. When I am dead, my dearest, by Christina Rossetti. When I am dead, my dearest, sing no sad songs for me. Plant thou no roses at my head, nor shady cypress tree. Be the green grass above me, with showers and dewdrops wet. And if thou wilt, remember. And if thou wilt, forget. I shall not see the shadows. I shall not feel the rain. I shall not hear the nightingale sing on as if in pain. And dreaming through the twilight that doth not rise nor set, happily I may remember, and happily may forget. Parental Recollections by Charles Lamb. A child's a plaything for an hour. Its pretty tricks we try, that for or a longer space, then tire and lay it by. But I knew one, that to itself all seasons could control, that would have mocked the sense of pain out of a grieved soul. Thou, straggler into loving arms, young climber up of knees, when I forget thy thousand ways, then life in all shall cease. What Winter Floods, What Showers of Spring by Emily Bronte. What winter floods, what showers of spring have drenched the grass by night and day, and yet beneath that spectre ring, unmoved and undiscovered lay a mute remembrancer of crime. Long lost, concealed, forgot for years, it comes at last to cancel time and waken unavailing tears. How Do I Love Thee? Sonnet 43 by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach, when feeling out of sight for the ends of being an ideal grace. I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need, by sun and candlelight. I love thee freely, as men strive for right. I love thee purely, as they turn from praise. I love thee with the passion put to use in my old griefs and with my childhood's faith. I love thee with a love I seem to lose with my lost saints. I love thee with the breath, smiles, tears of all my life, and, if God choose, I shall but love thee better after death. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to the 22nd A Novel Idea. American poet Carl Sandburg said poetry is an echo asking a shadow to dance. Thank you, Ariana, for inviting us into the echo and the dance of the poems featured in Murder by Degrees. I'd like to share a little bit about this amazing young woman. Ariana Morris is in her junior year at Redmond High School and has been part of the Poetry Out Loud for 3 consecutive years. Her second and third years, she won first at the school level and proceeded to regionals and then competed at the state level. And she hopes to advance to nationals next year and advocate for more funding for regional arts, recognition for the arts. So thank you, Ariana. Also, thank you to Leslie and Meg with the Dove String Quartet who played earlier. Thank you. I wanted to let you know that we not only appreciate your support for A Novel Idea, but also your generous support to help us expand and grow our library system. We are touching every corner of Deschutes County and look forward to the amazing community spaces that will be extend our reach for the next 50 years. The Lapine, Sisters, and Sun River libraries have been remodeled and are open for business. The new 40,000 square foot Redmond Library is also open and thriving. And we are a little more than a year away from the opening of the Central Library at Stevens Ranch. And after the Central Library opens, we will complete a full remodel of the downtown Bend Library. So it's a very exciting time. Yay. Thank you for your support of that. We are honored to have partnered with the Deschutes Historical Museum, who pulled together an amazing Novel Idea quilt exhibit. If you haven't already, please visit the museum and view this wonderful exhibit. If you show your library card, you can get in for free. Many thanks to Kelly Cannon Miller and her team at the museum for making this happen. Thank you to the Historical Museum. A Novel Idea has been sponsored by the Deschutes Public Library Foundation for 22 years, and we greatly appreciate the hard work of our foundation board members who find the sponsors and donors to keep this amazing event running and free for all people to enjoy. As a community event, we are grateful for hundreds of presenters, partners, readers, and sponsors who have supported our efforts during the last 22 years and whose support has made it possible to keep A Novel Idea free and accessible to people throughout Deschutes County. Our longest-running sponsors of A Novel Idea are the ECHO Fund, the E.H. and M.E. Bowerman Advised Fund of the Oregon Community Foundation, Bend Research/Lonza, and the Roundhouse Foundation. These loyal sponsors continue to make it possible for us to keep the programs free. The Roundhouse Foundation generously granted the library a 3-year pledge of $10,000 per year to continue to expand A Novel Idea outreach within our communities. We deeply appreciate the Roundhouse and all of our other sponsors for their generous partnership, so thank you. A list of our tireless community readers and the Novel Idea Advisory Committee members are listed in your program. We could not do this program without all of your amazing dedication. Thank you for your service and your late night reading. A few housekeeping details. Please silence your phones. We are pleased to have Roundabout Books tonight, selling books in the lobby after the presentation. We'll have a book signing following our question and answer session, and that will be in the Commons area. You should have received a card for questions. Please write down your questions on the cards. We'll gather those from you after the presentation and make that part of our question and answer. So now, to the best part of the evening. Ritu Mukerji was born in Kolkata, India, and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. From a young age, she has been an avid reader of mysteries, from golden age crime fiction to police procedurals and the novels of P.D. James and Ruth Rendell. She received a BA in history from Columbia University and a medical degree from Sidney Kimmel Medical College of Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia. And she completed a residency and training at the University of California, Davis, go Aggies, and has been practicing internist for 15 years. She lives in Marin County, California, with her husband and 3 children. Ladies and gentlemen, Ritu Mukerji.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the Deschutes Library. Libraries have played such an important role in my life as a reader and a writer, and I'm honored that Murder by Degrees was chosen for A Novel Idea. And thank you so much to all of you. I'm really thrilled to be here with you in this wonderful community of readers and book lovers. Murder by Degrees is a medical mystery, and I wanted to immerse the reader in 1875 Philadelphia, in the atmospheric and shadowy world of 19th century medicine. But at the heart of the story are the extraordinary, trailblazing women doctors whose lives inspired the fictional characters in the book. And so I wanted to start with a moment of inspiration from one of them. So since I write historical fiction, I'm going to set a scene for you. It's a time in the not-so-distant past, about 7 years ago. And if you can imagine me sitting at my kitchen table, it's late at night, the house is very quiet, and I have my books and papers spread out all around me. And at this point, I was firmly in the pre-contemplative phase of writing a novel. But I remember I was feeling excited because I knew that I had the seeds of a good story forming and the creative momentum was starting to build. But the looming question always was, how could I do this? How could this even be possible for someone like me? And at that time, my 3 kids were school age, so I had one in elementary, one in middle school, and one in high school. I was working as a doctor. I had no background in any kind of, formal writing career, so in editing, publishing, or journalism. And my time to work on this book was early in the morning and late at night. So these are not ideal conditions for writing a novel by any stretch of the imagination. But I felt so drawn to do it. And at one of these nighttime research sessions, I read this quote: "Work where the work opens." And these words were written in a diary entry in October 1861 by Dr. Ann Preston. And she was a physician and a professor at Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania. And this was a favorite phrase of hers, one that she often told her students. Dr. Preston was a Quaker and an abolitionist, and she had grown up in a very progressive family, one that supported her education. And before entering medical school at the age of 38, she had been a school teacher and a children's book author. And she would later go on to become dean of the college, and that was a distinction that made her the first woman to become dean of an American medical school. But the moment in 1861 was one of devastating setback for her, because the professional and the personal were colliding. The country was on the edge of a long and terrible war, and due to limited funds and a lack of enrollment, the medical school's Board of Governors had voted to suspend the 1861-1862 session, and so the college would have to close its doors. And so Dr. Preston wrote, "I have been sad for my country because it is slow to learn the wisdom which would bring prosperity, sad in the prospects of the institution to which I have given so much of my time and strength, for there now seems no possibility of success. And I fear that after all these years of toil, we may be doomed to succumb to the weight of opposition." But then she offers this: "Tonight, the inward encouragement is to do thy best. Work where the work opens, applauded or condemned, speak and write thy grandest inspiration, thy noblest idea, for thy work has been no failure." And the words are old-fashioned, they're kind of weighty with some religious overtones, but just all the more poignant, I think, because she obviously never thought anyone was going to read them. This was her private diary. And I remember being so moved by the courage that she draws upon in this moment of crisis, the call to face an uncertain future and keep going, and to focus on the small things that you can control. And there was something so fluid and really expansive about that phrase, work where the work opens, its meaning somewhat open to interpretation. And I really took those words to heart for my own situation, that there was never going to be the ideal time, perfect time to write the book. There was only now. And so I wrote this down on a Post-it note. I put it on the bulletin board above my desk, and that's where the visual inspiration for my imagination lives, along with old photographs and postcards of paintings. And I remember that over the 5 years that it took me to write the book, those simple but really powerful words became a guide for me, just to inspire me and encourage me to keep writing. And it reflected how much in the process of writing this book that the past would infuse the present. And I would say there were really 2 major influences on the book. First and foremost, Murder by Degrees is at its heart a mystery. And I wanted to create this for the reader, a twisty, suspenseful page turner that really keeps the reader guessing until the end. And that's because my own true love as a reader is mystery and crime fiction. And I have a vivid and wonderful memory of discovering Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None on the shelf, the mystery shelf in my middle school library. And I can still remember the spines of all her titles kind of lined up in a row, and I took out a little stack of them and put them on the floor next to me just to sort of keep them next to me. And then I promptly sat down cross-legged, on the floor and started reading. and was just so immersed and just transported into the story. And not much has changed for me in the many years since then. And there is something just so captivating to me about the structure of a detective story, and what I would call the astonishing breadth and depth of creativity that writers in this genre use in terms of character, in terms of setting, plot, narrative, and always with this fascinating character, the detective, as our interpreter, as our guide in the aftermath of a terrible crime. And I'm very drawn to books where there is a strong independent woman as the investigator. So someone who's really pushing the boundaries of what society expects of her, defies expectations. So writers like Sujatha Massey's Perveen Mystery, or Jacqueline Winspear's Maisie Dobbs, or Sue Grafton's Kinsey Milhone. And I love stories where the setting, whether that's a historical period or a physical landscape, is just so atmospheric and evocative that it's almost like a character itself. And for that, I always think of one of my favorite crime writers, Henning Mankell, and his Kurt Wallander mysteries, and how he uses the bleak but very starkly beautiful landscape of the Swedish countryside to kind of mirror his character's inner world. And so I knew that when I wrote my own novel, I wanted to incorporate those elements into my own work. And the other major influence was the time I lived in Philadelphia as a medical student. And I had always thought of Philly as a very historic city, but it wasn't until I lived there that I realized how much of the history of American medicine is there in places like the Mutter Museum, with its really fascinating displays of anatomic and pathologic specimens. And often I would go to the reading room and medical library at the historic College of Physicians, and they had a medicinal plant garden. You could look at all the different herbs. And my first apartment in the city, for those who are familiar, was really in the heart of the old city at 9th and Pine Street, and that's a block from Pennsylvania Hospital. This is the oldest public hospital in the United States. Its board of governors included Benjamin Franklin and Benjamin Rush, signers of the Declaration of Independence. And I remember, you walk onto the campus of this modern, bustling hospital, ambulances are coming into the emergency department, and then you kind of take this turn into the historic annex. And the surgical amphitheater is actually a beautiful space. It's a rotunda, and you walk into this room, and it's just high whitewashed ceilings and kind of a soaring ceiling, and your eyes are immediately drawn to this glass window in the top of the ceiling, circular, that really served an important purpose to maximize the amount of natural light that could come into the room, because the surgeons would operate between the hours of 11 and 2. And then you look down into what they called the pit, where the operating table was, and that's where the surgical team would assemble. And in the days before anesthesia, the surgical team would consist of at least 1 to 2 attendants whose only job was to physically restrain the patient. So actually hold them down so that someone didn't decide mid-procedure, because of the terrible lack of pain control, to just jump off the table and try and run away. And you look up, into the rafters, and there are these ringed stalls, and this was for the observers, right? So medical students or other doctors or sometimes members of the public. And so they would kind of lean over the railing and look down at the surgeon doing the surgery. And this idea of medicine and surgery as really public spectacle, almost on display in the 19th century. And so for me, there was always this very interesting juxtaposition between the modern and the old, when I lived there. And to be a medical student in a technology-saturated age, but at the same time to be in a place that was so steeped in history. And that's very true of the city itself, for those who are familiar. So many times I would be walking down, a street fully enmeshed in modern life, traffic horns blaring, cars whizzing by, and then you take this turn down a quiet, leafy cobblestone alley, and you're just taken into another time. And so these influences really simmered in my mind for a long time, for many years. I left Philadelphia, returned home to California, and started residency training and started a family. But always at the back of my mind, this dream was starting to take shape, that I wanted to write a mystery novel, and I really wanted to have a woman doctor, be the detective. And it was only years later that I discovered of the existence of Women's Medical College that I knew I had the piece that I needed. Because it was truly a revelation to learn of the existence of the medical school and the lives of these pioneering women doctors. We live in a time when half of all medical students in the United States are women. I'm a doctor. I had been a medical student in Philadelphia, but I knew almost nothing about this very important moment in American history, this unique institution that had been founded in 1850 by a group of Quakers that offered women students the same rigorous curriculum in terms of academics as was offered to men at the same time at places like Harvard or the University of Pennsylvania. And we have to recall this was a time when American medicine was so loosely regulated, just disorganized. The standards that we would recognize today, so 4 years of medical school, residency training in specialties, board certification, oversight by a medical board, so that doctors could, how they practiced and treated patients could be monitored. None of this was present at that time. And so the idea that there was an institution trying to train women doctors along these same lines was quite a revolutionary one. And I delved into this world through Drexel University in Philly, has a wonderful legacy center, collections, and special archives. And I started learning, the real life stories of these extraordinary women. And most of Drexel's collection is digital, and it's very rich in primary sources. So diaries, letters, surgical manuals, newspaper articles, course bulletins. It really painted this very vivid world to see. And in looking at these documents and the old photographs, it was almost like you could hear these voices from the past. And some of the women, like Dr. Preston, are better known to history. For example, there was Dr. Mary Putnam Jacoby. She was the daughter of G.P. Putnam, the New York publisher, who said that medical education for women was a, quote, repulsive pursuit, but nonetheless, he did pay for his daughter to go to medical school because that was her dream since childhood. And Dr. Jacoby was a proponent of using really rigorous scientific method to present academic research. She was also the first woman to be admitted to the University of Paris's École de Medicine for graduate study. Another was Dr. Carolyn Still Anderson. She was a graduate of Oberlin College and an 1876 graduate of Women's Med. She was one of the first Black women physicians in the United States. She started a private practice in Philadelphia, treating patients, and then a pharmacy in her husband's church. He was a minister, and she had a role as an educator in hygiene and physiology. There were even international students, one from India and one from Syria and Japan. And the idea of these women coming all the way to Philadelphia in the late 1800s to study medicine and then just go back to their home countries to set up clinics it was really extraordinary. But so many more. Their names are not as well known, and they were only what I could describe as delightfully non-traditional students. They had had whole careers as teachers, as journalists, as editors. One remarkable woman, she was a widow with grown children. She graduated from medical school at the age of 58, and then she went on to practice after that. And some were the product of progressive families who encouraged them, supported them, and then others were completely on their own, had to forge their own path, just very independent, courageous, funded their own medical education by working as tutors or seamstresses. And while the environment of the college was a very supportive one, after graduation, they faced fierce opposition to their work. And so they had to be very creative about career opportunities. And so some became what were called sanitary inspectors, almost like early public health officers for a city, going into the tenements, delivering babies, treating infectious diseases. Some became medical missionaries and traveled alone to India and China and set up hospitals and clinics, serving communities there. And then some of the best accounts were just of women who went out and opened these private practices in these remote locations. And there are these wonderful diary accounts of, well, I'm the only doctor for 50 miles around, and a house call must be made in the middle of the night, so I'm going to get on my horse and ride off with my equipment in 2 saddlebags. And it was just so vivid and remarkable. And what came through time and time again was how amidst the serious work, there was the joy of living. And I remember just being delighted by this old photograph of a Halloween party. And the students are fully dressed in costume, a group of them, and they're posing with, kind of these fake skeleton mannequins. That single photograph inspired the entire Halloween party scene in my book. And it was just so much fun to write. And in another, there's a photograph of the anatomy lab. And in this photo, the students are gathered around a cadaver, in the middle on the dissection table. And this was probably from 1880 or so, and there are 5 or 6 students, and they're wearing Victorian dress, of course, lace cuffs, lace collars, long aprons over their long dresses, long hair neatly pinned up in buns. And for anyone who has a medical background or has done, gross anatomy dissection, that this is physical work, it's hard work, it's dirty, it's messy. The smell of preservative gets in everything, and your hands get very sore and tired. It's heavy to lift and shift the position of the cadaver. And so to see a photograph like that just felt inspiring, of course, but just wonderfully subversive too. And so, though our lives were separated by more than 150 years and, of course, vastly different circumstances, this parallel started emerging. And it was just striking to me how time and again, their words felt so modern and relevant. They would write about the need to be respected, to feel valued for their life's work, to have the same opportunities as their male colleagues with similar training. And these are timeless themes, and there are certain threads of this that are still present in the culture of medicine and need to change. And many women were wives and mothers, and this had particular resonance for me because my oldest son was born during my 2nd year of residency training. And, the juggle of kind of balancing the personal and the professional has been, woven throughout my career. And so I was just astounded just by the breadth of experience, the obstacles they had overcome, and it was just like drawing back the curtain on a world that I didn't know existed. And truly, each one of these women could have been the subject of her own wonderful novel or history. And once I had that piece, I knew then that I could really draw the elements all together and set this mystery against the backdrop of the college and Philadelphia 10 years after the end of the Civil War with this woman doctor as detective. But, inspiration is a wonderful thing, of course, but there is a big space between the seeds of an idea and a fully finished novel. And so that's where I really had to learn as I went along and to create a process and a routine and a structure. But work where the work opens. And I started in a place that felt very familiar to me as a former medical student, which was doing research. And reading hundreds of pages and spending long hours in the library was not only familiar, but really fun. I really enjoyed that part of it. I have an endless curiosity about different things. And the first thing I really had to do is engage in what I call world creation. And I'm a very visual person, and so many of the scenes in the book came to me almost as like these cinematic images. And so I thought of it as one would think of like a theater set or a movie set. So before I could even think of really character or plot or narrative, I had to create the world to sort of see it and feel it and immerse myself in this visual setting. And this was as much for me as it is for the reader. I think historical detail really creates the scaffolding for a story like this. And I love to read historical fiction myself, and I think we've probably all had that moment where if one small detail is off, it's almost a little jarring and abrupt, and it feels like, the spell that the author is trying to cast is dissolved, it's broken. And so, first there was the world of Philadelphia in 1875. What did it look like? What did it sound like, smell like? What would it have felt like to walk down the street? And, if we wanted to have lunch or eat a snack, what would we have eaten? What would we have worn? And so I started by really looking over old maps of the city and, histories of the city and different industries and immigration patterns and fashion and social life, all to paint this, very broad picture. And, equally important was the world of 19th century medicine. And here again was another moment when libraries and librarians have really come to the rescue for me. And, I started this and, still continue to do this as an individual with a project. I'm definitely an amateur historian, and I didn't have an academic affiliation, but it was just remarkable how much help appeared when I needed it. I would email, archivists and, ask questions or be directed to wonderful resources. And so, slowly, I was able to put together pieces from like Google Scholar or PubMed through the National Library of Medicine, Hathi Trust, and, visit some of these archives in person. And so that was really a wonderful aspect of the whole thing. And I read a lot of old textbooks and journal articles and memoirs of Civil War era surgeons, and to look through the lens of a 19th century doctor was a fascinating exercise. We're in the days before steroids, before antibiotics, before insulin, before X-ray imaging. And so almost each and every scene of the book that I wrote, I would have to take a step back and really think it through. What treatments would have been available? What would the diagnosis be? What would be the language even to describe something so common, I talk about every single day, congestive heart failure, emphysema. What words would I use to kind of round that out? And, there's one hospital scene, of course, where Lydia is treating a patient with kidney disease. And this is glomerular nephritis. It's a common inflammatory condition of the kidney. And I remember I looked up an article in Lancet, which is a medical journal, from the treatment in 1876 of this disorder. And the recommended treatment is cupping, bloodletting with leeches, hot water baths, and a god-awful concoction called the Imperial Drink, which was a mixture of cream of tartar, warm water, and lemon. And I think the idea behind all of this actually was kind of purgative and emetic. So everything comes out one end or the other. And, this was actually behind a lot of 19th century medicine is this idea that if you somehow kind of expunge everything and it lessens the burden on circulation and kind of relieves congestion, improves circulation. So, there were all these moments I'd just be horrified at thinking about what patients had to endure. And then also, times when I'd be really amazed at the ingenuity of what they were able to do with limited diagnostic tools. And I couldn't write a medical mystery without paying homage to the original doctor/mystery novelist and Arthur Conan Doyle. And it's said that Sherlock Holmes was inspired by one of his professors at Edinburgh, the surgeon Dr. Joseph Bell. And Dr. Bell was apparently, just a master at observation and noting these minute details on exam that helped him make diagnoses. And this was actually very important to my story because at a time when forensics would be limited to non-existent, it's really Lydia's medical skills, her clinical skills, that are her unique superpower as an investigator, and to sort of observe the small details on exam, to see what other people don't, to listen and be intuitive. And so there's a moment in the Sherlock Holmes stories when Holmes tells Dr. Watson, you see, but you don't observe. And this is really the crux of what she does, and it was very important for moving the action of the story. And I also learned in writing this, how much medicine is its own language, and one that can just very easily, go right into the dry, dull, technical, boring. But I think when done well, there is a lot of power and mystery and beauty in some of these archaic, Latin terms. And, of course, every language needs a good translator. And I always thought of the doctor writers that I really love to read, like Abraham Verghese and Daniel Mason in fiction, and, of course, Oliver Sacks in nonfiction. And I think what they do so brilliantly is to distill that language into something that is evocative and beautiful, but also very understandable. So there's a very fine balance in doing that. And I wanted to create something that would be intriguing and interesting to people with a medical background and those who don't have one. And so from there, I really moved to focus on character. And this is where my creative juices, I felt, really could flow, and I could really let my imagination play, because with the setting, I had to be so, really be cognizant of accuracy and detail and getting all those little things right. But with character, then I could really sort of let my mind go. And I created detailed character studies for all of the main characters, villains included, because I think we need to understand their motivation as to why they do the things they do. And in creating this main character, Lydia Weston, the question I'm often asked is, how much is she like you? And, many of my own experiences, certainly in medicine, even though time separates us by so much, are Lydia's. And, the scene, for example, where she's teaching her students, cadaver dissection in the gross anatomy lab. I mean, that's such a rite of passage for medical students, and I can honestly remember it like it was yesterday, that how nervous I felt at seeing the cadaver, the reverence I felt for the person who had donated their body so that we could learn, and just that first time, like the weight and the feel of the dissection tools, kind of the cold metal in your hands, what it felt like to make that incision in the skin, the smell of preservative, of course. And so those parts were very natural and easy to write, and also who she is as a person, because she's someone who loves art and culture, is very interested in literature, and that's something we share, and particularly for the poetry. And this was something very interesting, because when I started writing the book, the poetry was just a very minor aspect of the story. I just wanted to use it as a way to describe who she is and, her love of beauty and the written word. And it ended up being this really wonderful recurrent theme through the whole novel, from the title to Emily Dickinson's epigraph to just almost like this cryptic puzzle, a mystery within the mystery, that I created from using just really different fragments of 19th century poetry that I love to read, both English and American. And so that ended up, there were many times in the writing of this that certain things surprised me as how I envisioned and how they actually turned out, and this was really one of them. And then from there, really the most challenging part, of course, was structuring the story. It's one thing to love to read crime fiction, quite another to, really sustain the arc of the narrative over an 80,000-word novel. And I think that structure is important for any novel, but it's particularly so for a good mystery, because there are certain, key elements that really have to be present. And, things like building suspense, building atmosphere, layering in the red herrings, and knowing when to reveal things and at what time. And I feel this very strongly. Total fair play to the reader is that all the clues must be present in the book, so that if someone wants to try and solve it, they should be able to. So there will never be any, last-minute dream sequences, amnesia, being revealed. No, it must all be there so that someone can go back and say, aha, there it was. And so this part of the process really required just a huge amount of work, the writing and the rewriting and the revision. And this is where I felt that having a really wonderful editor was just so helpful. Someone who could really take that global view of, the arc of the story, but at the same time really get into the granular detail of what's working, what's not, and asking probing questions, why this is this way, and just to make the story, really tighten it up and make it suspenseful. And so, though I say that, of course, I have no background in a writing career, it was really surprising to me how working as a doctor, as a medical student, as a resident, had really prepared me and helped me to be a writer, because I knew how to do difficult things, to take risks, to set a far-off goal, and to work towards it, even when I couldn't see a tangible result, and to be adaptable and resilient, when things are not going the way that you planned. And that's obviously very true in art and medicine and life in general. And just learning how to reset and reframe and start over again. And so in the 5 years that it took me to write the book, I was always with the lessons from the lady doctors and this willingness to be bold and to not feel limited by circumstances, to try, to fail, to free myself really from the outcome. Because when I started writing this, it was just something I really wanted to tell this story. Of course, I think we all have this dream that you'd like to be published, but there was a long period there where it was just me and the process of writing it. And over time, what happened was the writing became this space of creative renewal, and it really taught me so much about myself, about reinvention and resilience, and even on the most difficult days, and of which there were many, when it felt that it was just impossible really to write. It never felt like an obligation or something that I had to do. It was an expansive space, a challenging one at times, but never a constricting one. And particularly during COVID, the writing became almost like this lifeline, because I looked forward to the pleasure and freedom of this space, because I had created this whole world, with characters who were almost as real to me as old friends. And so that was when, it was just, I could let my imagination go. And it was very freeing. And so even when I felt tired, I would just sort of edit a paragraph or read a few passages of poetry. And so it was really in those small steps that the momentum started to flow, and those consistent small steps was how the book was written. And, now at the end of it, of course, the best part, obviously, is to connect with readers and to learn what touches them and what intrigues them or what puzzles them or what resonates with them. And, of course, I hope this is a good mystery that you find yourself immersed in, but I also hope that you'll really be as inspired as I was by these women doctors who lived and worked so long ago, because in many ways the work they did was the legacy for women doctors like me to practice. And so I will close by saying to you, work where the work opens, because you never know the wonderful, surprising, and really fulfilling places it may take you. Thank you.
Okay. It's now time for your medical exam.
Yes. Oh my goodness, I'm having flashbacks here.
So I'm gonna ask a medical question first.
Okay.
Why was mercury used for treatments for patients?
Yes, that's very interesting. So mercury was, so, you know, I allude to the fact that so much of medicine was really loosely regulated, and that was certainly true of pharmaceuticals. And so in the course of doing research, mercury was initially used because as a compound with other medications, and usually this was some combination of alcohol, it had excellent pain relieving effects. And so around the time of the Civil War, it was found to be very effective. And this is interesting because some say that Louisa May Alcott, when she was a nurse during the Civil War, may have taken, some doses of mercury for an autoimmune disease. And obviously what we know now is it has horrible neurotoxic effects and, of course, can be fatal in large doses. But there were all these instances of things where, mercury or, high doses of like the plant that is digoxin just being used kind of willy-nilly in these compounded medications. And again, far before the days of the FDA or any kind of regulation. And so, pharmacists or apothecaries or, physicians who really had no moral qualms would put together these drugs and make quite a lot of money selling these tonics and potions. But mercury in particular, it also has a diuretic effect. So in diseases like congestive heart failure, where fluid is kind of accumulating in the body, it was actually a very effective diuretic.
Okay. Let's see. Also, if you have questions, get your cards out to our medical staff who are coming around. Speaking of toxic environments, do you find there is still much sexism in medicine?
Yes. Well, it's so if you've read the book, there is a one scene, right, where Lydia is with her student at Pennsylvania Hospital. And that scene was among the easiest to write in the entire book. And, that was at a time in 1875 when women were starting, just like certain women doctors were being allowed to come into Pennsylvania Hospital and, what we call round, which is go see patients and, take care of patients in the hospital. And it was still quite rare. But that scene, it was actually extraordinary. It just really flowed out because there are certain elements, of course, about the culture of medicine that still remain to be changed. But that combination of what she's feeling, she's angry because she's being taken to task by this really belligerent and obnoxious male doctor. She knows what she's doing. She knows her student is also excellent. And, I've just experienced that myself where I can feel myself getting flushed. I'm very angry, but I know I have to remain professional. And it's just this combination of feelings. And I think if I had so many of my friends who read the book, who are also women who had trained at the same time, I think most people probably would be able to share a story like that. So while we've made great progress, obviously, I think there's no question in terms of what women doctors have achieved, in the field in terms of, just Nobel laureates, chairman of academic departments, heading government agencies in every specialty. But at the same time, there's so many things that remain to be changed.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Mysteries are the second highest circulated genre in our library system. Why do you think mysteries have such a broad appeal, and why do you think they're the most important? What are the most important elements? Some of it you already answered.
Yes, I just do think that, I know that mystery writing and mystery and crime fiction is considered genre fiction, but when I think about, some of the first authors that I ever read, so I'm thinking of P.D. James, Ruth Rendell, Val McDermid, I just think some of the great writers, what they do in terms of character and structure and the diversity of setting, time periods, landscape, is just so extraordinary that it really transcends what we would say is genre writing, and I would consider it just great writing. And some of those elements I mentioned is just this idea of this terrible crime, be it a murder or something else, and just how the detective is our interpreter and guide, into these areas of moral quandary. And, of course, we all love it, and I particularly love mysteries with a very satisfying resolution where the bad guys are the bad guys and they get punished. But I think there's also, a lot of room for kind of subtlety and nuance, just as in life itself. And so I think that's endlessly appealing.
Okay, this is a big question for us. Is this the start of a series?
Yes, so I am working on the second book right now, and it's set in 1876 at the World's Fair that was held in Philadelphia, the Centennial Exposition. And actually, in real life, the women doctors were there showing, they had an exhibit in something called the Women's Pavilion. But of course, I've taken the actual history and then, put my imagination to it. And so the story is centering on a woman surgeon who's part of the college and a surgical demonstration that goes awry. But I did, before I even started writing the book, I envisioned it as a series. So these two are in the works, but I certainly have ideas for more.
Okay, good news. Let's see. We've been asked by many readers about the title of your novel and Emily Dickinson's poem. Can you tell us a little bit of why you chose that particular poem and how it relates?
Sure. So Emily Dickinson is my favorite poet, and because this was a really unfortunate thing I found out in the copy editing stage, that we couldn't include her poems in the body of the book because while she was writing at that time period, she was not published in the United States. So there's no way Lydia could have gone to Mr. Kohler's bookshop and, picked up a volume of Emily Dickinson's poems. And so the book actually had a different title. I had another Dickinson poem, and the title in my mind, from the beginning when I started writing it, was The Bones Obligation. And I remember this so vividly because I was, so much about the book changed during the writing of it and the editing process. But my editor called one day and said, "We really need to change the title." And he said that, there's concerns that, the Bones Obligation, is there a character named Bone? Who wants to read about an obligation? If someone sees that, on the library shelf, are they going to want to pick it up? So anyways, these very funny discussions going back and forth. And long story short, I was very attached to having, but I wanted the epigraph, the kind of an opening poem by Emily Dickinson, and I wanted a fragment of her work to be the title. So there was a lot of back and forth, us all looking at, different Dickinson poems. And I actually do think Murder by Degrees, it fits beautifully because to me, her poems are just so multi-layered, they're mysterious. You can take away different meanings. And I think people do, have different interpretations what the title means. But to me, Murder by Degrees, the whole of it came not at once. 'Twas murder by degrees. And that to me suggests that when we find that body, we think it's Anna, right? But there's all this ambiguity about who that is. And so the murder didn't happen all at once. It sort of happened by degrees. And so as things get revealed during the action, more of that mystery comes through.
Good. And thanks for not using obligation for a book that we asked the whole community to read.
There you go.
Let me check with my medical staff. Did we have any more questions? Oh, we do. Sorry, that's just late breaking. How is the anatomy of poetry similar to the way the body works in a symphony and communicated by the language of medicine? I don't know if you understood that.
That's a great question. I think, As I mentioned in the talk, I think there is so much to the language of medicine. And, this was one of the things that, in looking at some of the old Latin terms, I really do think there is a lot of beauty and mystery about some of these terms, because when you think about like the medical profession and the medical world, it's something, regardless of our background, we'll all interact with in some way at some point in our lives. And yet there's still, in the way doctors are trained, or the idea, it just feels very closed off and mysterious, right? There's sort of rituals and traditions about it that kind of lend itself to mystery. But I think with poetry and with medicine, there's structure to everything. And there's that interplay between structure and beauty and the use of language that does kind of intersect. And, you think about, thought about this all the time, particularly in writing the medical scenes, or even, when I would tell a patient like difficult news, the language you're using, the tone you're using, the structure of it, how you present it, it's there, in poetry and in medicine.
Okay.
There's like more.
My assistant for the book signing, is that in the lobby or the commons area? Lobby. We'll be in the lobby with the book signing after this. Okay. Talk about the relationship between Lydia and Detective Davies.
Oh, I'm so glad someone asked that. So, yes, there have been many questions. What is going to happen between Lydia and Sergeant Davies? And I will say stay tuned for the next book, because this is funny, because Sergeant Davies also he was rather like the poetry. When I started writing the book, I envisioned him as a very minor character, someone who would just really be the foil to kind of a little bit of the bumbling of Inspector Volker. And he ended up being a very important character and one of my favorites, because I think he offers us this perspective, because his tension, the dynamic between him and Lydia, is not so much he is suspicious of her because she's a woman. It's more that she's an educated person. And so he was really the voice I was able to use to really explore kind of some social commentary and this very real tension between like the working class versus the educated classes. And so his perspective, I think, is really an important one. And I just really like him as a character. He's very open-minded, and so he'll be back in the next one.
Museum is almost over.
Okay, our final question here.
Final question.
Okay. Did you know who did it when you started the novel?
Yes, so the murderer did not change. The beginning, so the prologue where, the young woman is running through the streets of Philadelphia, and kind of the very beginning of the book and the ending and the murder did not change, but everything else did, through the middle. So I was very glad about that.
Okay. Thank you so much
Thank you.
For gracing us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Ritu will be in the lobby signing books, and thank you for doing our 22nd A Novel Idea. Thank you.
Thank you.